Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian O'Leary, Executive Director of the Book Industry Study Group, and welcome to today's webinar, Future-Proofing Your Publishing Workflows. We're lucky today to have Dani Leyhue from WoodWing, a BISG member, and contributor to our workflow committee in particular, to talk to us kind of through WoodWing's and her own perspective on managing workflows with the long-term, with longevity in mind. Dani, welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to you. I know that you're going to give us a little bit of your background as part of your presentation, but you're currently serving as product manager within WoodWing itself. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. So hello, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is Dani, and I started off in the design world as a graphic designer, and I have worked both for agencies, magazine, and also for textbooks. I used to help out creating textbooks that accidentally led me into working with a company that used WoodWing software. And from there, I became an implementer and a partner of helping roll out software and technologies at different companies. And then one day, WoodWing came along and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you on our team." So from all aspects, whether you're creating, technically managing, or from the software perspective, I've been there. So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about workflow, publishing, things that I've learned in the industry, both from my own experience and from working with other companies in the industry. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. All right, so let's start off at the beginning. In the beginning, there was print, right? Print has been around for a number of years, and everyone got really comfortable with delivering a print product. Now, this is great, except for if I step back and look at the wide timeline, things started to change. The first real big change I will put out is in 1971, we had Project Gutenberg. That was when we started to take print books and have this giant initiative to take the books and turn them into a digital format, making them much more accessible to people worldwide. Now, roughly 20 years after that, we have a new disruption. Audible is launched. For the first time, we had audiobooks that we could easily access in an online environment. Now, the very first version of Audible would only give you an audiobook for about 2 hours at a time. But still, this is a whole new format to manage. Am I creating content in the right format that my readers want? In 98, that's when we had our first digital book reader. That's when the Rocket ebook was created. Yet again, another disruption to how books are created, consumed, and delivered to the end user. 10 years after that, roughly, we have the Kindle store that first comes out. And of course, we have people who are reading on Kindle Unlimited, or that's where they're going to buy their digital ebooks. So what you can see here is that every, let's say, 10 to 20 years, we have a major disruption in how are books consumed? How are people wanting to read their content? And if I look at this, the big thing that I can take away is that the only constant in life is that there will be change. Who knows where books will end up next and where we need to be able to deliver them? So thinking about a strategy that makes sense, not just for today, but also for tomorrow, is even more important to content creators. Now, this is a very old number, and it comes to me from In Publishing magazine, but 74% of publishers have at least one mobile app. And that's just talking about a mobile application. That is ignoring websites. If you have a website, a CMS feed, all of the different avenues that a printed booklet content can come in, that's a lot to manage, right? You have to worry about your print format, your digital, your audio. Gosh, that's a lot to track. So I empathize with you. There's a struggle to keep up. It's expensive. Every time we have a new platform that comes along, suddenly, okay, now we have to pay to make sure that this is read and recorded for Audible, that this is suddenly going to be managed on a website, that we understand how this works. It's time consuming trying to figure out what every single channel looks like, how they work. And let alone if you don't understand that part of the technology and that part of the area, finding someone who can teach you all of the different steps, that's a challenge, because someone might say, oh yeah, I understand how to get to the Amazon marketplace. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. So again, it's a hard world to be in, and I understand. There is a really great quote from the CEO of Meredith, Meredith being a magazine corporation that creates titles like Better Homes and Gardens, Parents Magazine. And this quote is, "It's not news to anyone that there has been a pronounced shift in readership and advertising from print to digital. For a few important brands, print is no longer serving the brand's core purpose." And I think that that speaks volumes. And it's not just in the magazine industry that this is happening. It's also in our textbook industry. It's in children's books. It's in young adult books. People more and more want to be able to have access to their content wherever they go, especially in this post-pandemic world where there are more people who are working from home, taking classes at home. And so they need to be able to have all of that content at their fingertips in the ways that they are used to reading in whatever format. Okay, let's not beat around the bush. There's a lot of problems here. It's a struggle. It's a struggle to make sure that your book is in all of the formats that you need, that you're getting to EPUB, to Mobi. It's a struggle to understand each of the different endpoints, whether that's your website, your mobile platform, an application, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. All of these different platforms have a lot of different things that you have to track. And that's ignoring all of the rights management. Because if you have content coming in from creators, be it an illustrator or a photographer or content writers, you need to understand, can I use this content on all of my different platforms? So having said that, this gets complex and it's not an easy challenge, but it's worth solving, and I'll get to that. The first question that most people tend to ask me is, Dani, you know workflows. How do I change my workflow, especially on a limited budget? There are ways, and I'll talk to you and I'll get there to it, but I understand you, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, this really resonates with me, you're not the only one. This is a challenge and we'll talk about it. Last big area is that because there are so many different disruptors in the marketplace, people have constantly had to change their tool sets. Where am I storing my files? How am I delivering my files? How does my printer take files? What am I using to automate different processes? Every single time you introduce a new change or a new tool, it creates this piecemeal workflow. And the more piecemeal it is, the more inefficient it is, because suddenly you have people that maybe don't understand, oh, this is where I'm supposed to archive content. Oh, this is when another editor should be looking at my content. And some of these outdated tools, people don't understand. So it becomes inefficient. It becomes harder to track because your editors and content creators are all on different pages. They have different expectations. It just leads to inefficiency, miscommunication, and you become increasingly vulnerable to human errors. Because if I don't know that this is what I'm supposed to do, I may not archive my content the way that people expect. Okay, true story that has happened. I was working with a magazine company and they were writing a story about the Olympics. Their writer started working on this story and then had to drop from the project. So they hired a second writer to come in, restart the story. At the same time that this was happening, their digital content writers were writing a separate story about the Olympics. When I heard that this was happening, I sat back and I said, you guys realize you have just paid 3 different writers to write one story about the Olympics. Now, if they had sat down and talked strategy of, hey, we want to be able to write this once and publish it and use it everywhere, they might have been able to save both time and money. So that's what I'm slowly dripping into, is this idea of maybe separate teams and not thinking holistically is not the way to go. So if I look at this top level, print is first, print is still king. On our print workflow, we're writing, editing, revising, designing, possibly doing copy edit fixes, writing to fit, fact checking before everything goes off to printer. Now, in the world of books, once it also goes off to print, that's probably when you're also going to start thinking about how do I get it into a digital format? That digital format could be your XML, HTML, whatever file format of your choice. Perhaps you're using a conversion house. Perhaps you have a department that's managing all of that digital endpoint. But once it is in that XML or HTML format, there's probably someone who has to check and make sure, did everything convert successfully? Are all of my glyphs retained? Are the fractions being captured the way that they need to? So it creates another round of editing inside of that digital file format. And that's entirely separate from those that need to have the true EPUB. Those that want to have that really graphic, pixel perfect look because they want to be able to have bubbles, they want to have interactivity. Now, if you're going that route, you probably have a separate department who is creating all of your functionality. And they do this work all after the print design was created. So you create this system of editing the content 2 or 3 times when maybe there's a more efficient way. This efficient way is the multi-channel approach. It's sitting back and thinking, okay, where does this content need to go? And where does it make the most sense for me to write it? So if I start writing in a platform or a program that will allow me to write, edit, and revise the content, and then flow it quickly into print or digital or web, wherever it needs to go, that creates a lot of efficiency and allows you to reuse your content in a way that will be more efficient and save you a lot of money in the process. Now, there's a lot of different ways to go about this multi-channel workflow. There are a lot of publishers who have different needs, but this is the high level idea, is strategizing how and where you want your content to be. One example that I'll go through a few examples, but the first one is Editora do Brasil. That's a company that we work with. And there was a law that was recently passed in Brazil that requires all book publishers are forced contractually to have their textbooks completely online. They are no longer saying that it's okay just to have the printed book. So we helped them find a way, okay, let's take all of your textbooks, let's make them available online. Let's put them onto your mobile apps. Let's put them into all of these different book readers that you can have and that sell and distribute the content. We helped them with over 150 titles, 50,000 pages, 20,000 images. So it's possible to do. It's a little bit of work to strategize and find out exactly where you need to go, but we can help get you there. Another company that we work with is Scholastic here in the US. So with Scholastic, they have a lot of content that they have to manage, and they use a centralized hub to manage the content and to help automate some of the processes that they have to do every single day. Things like, what version of the file am I using? Creating all of the PDFs. Are all of the PDFs being delivered to people? So picking up and looking at their workflow, they found, oh, there are some inefficiencies here that maybe a software could help us organize things better, that we could help deliver better. Abrams Books that we've worked with, they are a company that, again, similar to Scholastic, they had a lot of automated tasks, specifically for file management. Let's say that I am a designer at a company and I'm working with someone named Ruth. Ruth likes to store all of her files on her external hard drive. If Ruth stores the files on an external hard drive, I don't have access to them. I don't know how far she is in the process. I can't work with her images. I can't start planning my web story. So in that aspect, having things in that central hub allows us to work a little bit more efficiently and work together. That's what Abrams did. It allowed people like Ruth to start working together and automating and creating page proofing much more efficiently. Curriculum Associates, this is my last example that I have for you today. Yet again, this is a company that had a lot of different inefficiencies because they did not have a structured workflow. So today we have student to teacher editions of books being completely automated and generating PDFs. We also have a book map planning system for them. So they have a flat plan of where all of their chapters are going to be, where their books will be. We help create the InDesign pages, help create the articles with all of the text, and make sure that everything gets placed, because the content writers want to be writing rather than placing, and the designers want to be doing things like finessing the design rather than doing the boring work of just copying and pasting things onto a page. Okay, let's get into some benefits, because yes, we talked a lot about challenges, but there are reasons to change, and let me give you a few of those. When you start moving into a multi-channel workflow, the first big thing that we notice is that it saves a lot of time. If you are working with siloed departments, and back in that instance where I had the story about the Olympics that was being created 3 times, that was a 30% reduction as soon as we started working with that company and talking to them about, hey, let's store your articles in a way that you can use it in print or in digital or wherever you have license to use it. This saved them a tremendous amount of time, because now the web team has faster content than they would if they have to wait for print, and print suddenly has access to all of the great stories that the web team was writing. So they really started to rethink their strategy of how they created and distributed their content. Software companies like WoodWing have sophisticated workflow configuration. So for example, if I am working on a textbook, I know that it may start off at a rough draft, then it goes into editing, fact check, copy fit, final check, final design review. All of these steps happen on every single file for anything that we create. Having a built-in workflow means that I now know exactly where every file is in the system. I no longer have to worry about, ooh, I sent this design or this layout to my art director and I haven't seen the folder back in 2 weeks. Work isn't getting lost. We can all see exactly, oh, this file is with Bob right now, or it's with Chris. I know that I can go knock on their door, say, hey, have you had a chance to look at this? I really need it back. Let's keep this moving within the system. It helps automate all of those checks and balances that you need when you're creating text and creating images for books. Also, using software systems like WoodWing, it helps to globally distribute your content. So whether you're pushing to your website, to a social media platform, to an application, or to good old-fashioned print, we can help take your pages, make sure that it gets to the platform that you need it to go to. There are a lot of people who they have a pre-press department and tell me, no, it's pre-press's job to get just to distribute everything. From all of the pre-press people that I've worked with worldwide, they say we love WoodWing because, well, it helps us automate that delivery and it makes it so much faster for us. Saving time also leads to saving money. When you're creating a book and you also have the audio format, you have a lot of different content you have to manage. You have to manage the scripts, you've got to manage the contract, you've got to manage the audio files themselves. So storing everything in one centralized location becomes paramount, right? Because otherwise I have things on a file, on a hard drive, I have things tucked away in an email, maybe I sent a file to a coworker. And now if everyone's working from one place, oh, we can all see this is where the progress is, with instead of having to constantly nag at our coworkers. So you start to consolidate all of your assets into one central hub. That could be your text, that could be your images, your audio files, videos, whatever it is. And it's this content hub. Once you have a content hub, you can then reuse that content in other books, workbooks, textbooks. You can also possibly reuse it in different brands if you have a different textbook or a different outsourced book that you're working with. So it allows you to reuse and retwist all of the work that you've already created. This also helps you to easily deploy your content into multiple platforms instead of having to recreate it or send it to a conversion house to create XML to distribute. If you are taking videos and you are trying to publish them for educational purposes, like a YouTube channel, we can also hook up to that channel so that once the video is created and tagged appropriately, it's delivered to that endpoint, helping make some of that upload process a little bit easier. Last big thing here is that printing costs. We know that paper is more expensive than ever, so people like to buy things in a digital format. It's available immediately and it's cheaper. So making sure that our books are available across the industry in a way that people can access is a huge benefit. So the idea of the content hub that I'm alluding to, all of your content comes in a variety of different formats. These are just a few. I'm sure there's more, but you have things like a digital asset management system or a DAM, a headless CMS, a traditional CMS. Maybe you have contributors, writers, whether they're in-house or external. You've got videos being shot, you've got images, illustrations, graphs, all of these different things are coming into you and you have to organize it somewhere. And you have to organize it in a way that people can find the content, right? Putting it into one central hub that everyone understands and that everyone can access makes it that much easier to reuse the content. So that content can then be used for your print, your web, your digital, your audio, and then ultimately automatically archive as well. Because once you've created the content, there's a good chance you may need to refer back to it at some point. So Content Hub orchestration is the goal that we're trying to work towards. Okay, image workflows. If you're talking about images, there's a lot of things that a digital asset management system can help you with and that you can benefit from. The first big area is for ease of use. So if you start working with a DAM, you probably will get an image repository that allows you to share and collaborate. This means internally and this means externally. So if I have an image that I need to send out for color correction, or it needs to go back to an illustrator because maybe I need the graph extended or I need the illustration to be notated differently, this allows me to collaborate in a whole new way. It also allows you to keep the original images, or you can make copies and variants of them. So for example, if I'm starting with a map of the United States, I send it back to my external illustrator and say, hey, could you please do this in a way that will show me the different mountain regions or show me just the rivers of America? And then they can illustrate it. I still have my original version. I have the new version that sits right next to it. My designers can then pick and choose, does this version work better or does the other version work better? Both of them are stored in ways that are easy to find in that central content hub. In that collaboration, it allows the authors, the illustrators, the editors, the designers, everyone to access that content. I can't stress enough that having everyone working within the same system and understanding how to find the content is hugely beneficial. If your designers, editors, and writers don't know where all of the content is, it's hard for them to use it. Your imagery, as soon as it's inside of your DAM, can be picked up by the design team. So instead of everyone having to slowly email in images or having to ship USB flash drives, having to download things from stock photographs, once it's inside of the digital asset management system, suddenly my designers have access to a lot more. They have a richer library to pull from, which means they don't have to create as many things. They can just use what already exists today. A huge benefit to this is that if you are working with external teams, external illustrators, color correctors, graph creators, wherever it may be, they likely have to use a VPN system to access your server. If you're working with something in the cloud-based inside of a digital asset management system, you may not have to VPN anymore. Not having to VPN could save licenses, and it also saves time and connection speed. Having a project management system to understand the current status of your images, your graphs, your content, it just leads to increased visibility and transparency. This is a huge selling point for art directors and managing editors. If you can suddenly see, oh, this is the status of where this book is, and see things holistically, because maybe you have 5 different designers or content creators all working on the same files, you suddenly have a top-down view. Oh, these are the files that we need to finish before it goes to print. Here's what's still outstanding. It gives you a new level of transparency that most people haven't had before. Working within a digital asset management system also gives you regulated metadata that you can use to search and store your content, which makes it easier to find, to track, and to localize. So if you need to send something out for a different translation, it's that much easier for it to go. As far as efficiency is concerned, we have wonderful things like the ability to version something. So let's say that I create an illustration of an apple. My apple is red. My art director decides, no, I wanted a green image. Okay, I'll color correct it. Let's make the apple green. Later on down the road, oh, let's go back to where it was red. I haven't lost all my work. I have a version control that will let me go back and set it back in time to where it was when the apple was originally red. So we have the ability to go back and forwards. This digital asset management system gives you all of the benefits of working within the system, workflow, creating a single source for where all of your content lives. And across the board, we've seen that it makes companies so much more efficient because the number of rounds of revisions goes down. Everyone's working within the same area, so it means less communication has to happen via email because everyone's just working in the system, and suddenly I don't need to, hey, art director, what files do you need me to work on today? It's inside of my inbox. I know what I need to be working on. Okay, holistic view, tips and tricks if you are starting to think about changing either your workflow or moving to a new channel. The first big area, first question that I'm going to ask is, what is your goal? What are you striving towards? Are you trying to create efficiencies? Is it more important that you get to a new platform? Do you need to have things in XML for a certain reason? Understanding what the goal is and then having a way to measure that goal will give you a baseline. And working with that baseline is going to help drive your decision as to what needs to change and why. So again, define your goal. Second big tip and trick is to culturally merge the digital and the print teams. Now, in the world of publishing, this is a big, scary topic, especially for people in the print world, because we haven't had to think about digital before. It's harder to think about things that maybe have to go to a CMS platform. Suddenly, I now have to think about interactivity. What would things look like in an RGB space? How do I have widgets? Is it possible to have videos? Do I need videos? There are whole new areas to consider as soon as you start to merge these two teams. So you're thinking simultaneously about the content that needs to go both to print and digital. If you start making this multi-channel transformation or moving towards a content hub, you'll probably need an expert who can help guide you so that you can understand the big picture. I've seen a lot of teams try to manage this in-house, and some do very well, and they do it beautifully. But it's a lot of work to learn about a process that you've never had to do before, which is why I strongly recommend making sure that you have an analyst or having a project manager, having someone who can help guide your decisions, who's been there before, who knows what you're going through and can help lead you so that you have less confusion, less bumps on the road. Learning what's possible in each file format is incredibly important. I've had book publishers ask me, Dani, should I work inside of HTML or should I go to EPUB? What format should my book be in? That depends on what your goal is. Is your goal that the book format be perfect inside of HTML? Do you need it to be perfect, pixel perfect? What type of content are we working with? If my goal is that I want to create Flash videos, which Flash hasn't been around for a while, that's not a great goal because maybe my end platform is that I need it to be on iPad. Well, iPad can't support Flash videos. So I need to know my goal is to get to the iPad. I won't use Flash videos to get there. So understanding all of the different hoops of the platform will help you structure what file type you're working with and help define your goal. All right, a little bit about WoodWing in the background and why I'm here. WoodWing is a company that's been around for over 20 years. We were founded in 2000. We have over 230 employees worldwide. We serve over 5,000 customers. And when I say customers, I don't mean people, I mean different companies. That's what I'm referring to. As far as the people who use our software, we have roughly 90,000 users inside of our systems every single day. And our software is used in over 60 companies, and we have 70 different partners and implementers who can help get our software set up and onto systems efficiently. Our two big software solutions that we sell are WoodWing Assets and WoodWing Studio. WoodWing Assets is our digital asset management system. We've rolled this out to a number of companies who are quite happy with it. It can do all of the wonderful things that I was stressing on earlier, where you have that image workflow that creates the content hub. That's Assets. If you're actively working on creating content, you're writing the content, you're designing the content, that's Studio. That's more for your daily work and production creation. So again, your digital asset management system, that's Assets. That's where you store, manage, reuse, share, archive. This is just a place that gives you a library of content so that you can unlock that resource, reuse it again and again, share it to the departments that need access to it. It creates this cloud-based file storage so that other people can access my content. I can share it out to others, and it creates a single source of truth. This is the file that's linked to the design file. Everyone has access to it. We can color correct it. It's all stored in Assets. Assets has a built-in rights management system. So if you have files that are copyright or limited rights, we can set up that and make sure that your users can see the metadata before it is ever placed on a design layout. Makes it a lot easier to not use content in ways that you shouldn't be using it. Again, Assets gives you that holistic view to see all of the different options of content that you can place, that you can take, that you can reuse. Next to that, we have our WoodWing Studio system. This is the house for where you're working on files actively. So if I am actively writing an article, if I'm actively designing a layout, everything is stored inside of Studio. We publish articles from Studio. We create PDFs from Studio. That's the heart and soul of WoodWing, is planning, producing, publishing. Print, digital, wherever it needs to go, that's what Studio is for. Studio sings beautifully when people want to streamline or automate a process. Now, let me be very clear, as someone with a design background, my goal here is not to replace editors and designers. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help the editor or designer so that they don't have to do the boring tasks like copy paste or create PDF over and over again. I would rather you focus on the designing and the editing aspects and then let tools like InDesign Server connected to Studio do the boring work for you. It just helps your efficiency throughout the day. Inside of Studio, we have a library system. So think of it like if I'm working on a file, no one else can check that file out. If I'm working on that file, you can see that I have it checked out. It creates that new level of transparency that people aren't used to. And it allows you to see everything with that big bird's eye view that we love. If you have multiple tasks that you need to manage, such as, oh, that I have an illustration that needs to be created, or a photo shoot, or something that needs to be fact checked, we do have different tasks that we can store and see inside of our studio system. So you can create a checklist of things that need to be done. Everything gets done before it goes to print. You know that the book is going to be successful because, oh, it went through every round of revisions that it was supposed to have. So again, our focus here is on let's get the creatives creating and removing all of those manual tasks and inefficiencies. Our goal is to unlock your content and unlock your potential. Okay, with that, that takes me through all of the slides that I wanted to cover today. Let's get into your questions and let's start addressing anything that I may have missed.
Great. Thank you, Dani, both for the presentation and your willingness to take questions. We have several in the queue, and maybe I could start with one. So I think a core argument that you're making is that workflows are increasingly required to deliver across multiple platforms. What are you seeing in terms of trends in terms of platform use or format? So HTML, XHTML, XML, EPUB, et cetera. I mean, you've got a lot of different customers. Maybe it's a lot of noise, but be kind of interesting to see what you see.
That's a really great question. And it's going to vary based on the need of the customer. So
Right.
first of all, workflows are becoming more and more necessary because in today's economy, people have to do more with less. And I understand that. Budgets are tight. We need to create content. It's expensive to get paper. It's expensive to print. So we have to get creative with how we stretch the budget. So in creating a workflow and creating automations, it helps save money so that you can do more with less. I've seen some book publishers come to us and then suddenly they didn't have the original budget to publish to a digital platform, but because they set up a workflow, because they gained efficiency, suddenly they do have a budget to go to HTML. As far as what the file format standard is, again, it varies by region and it varies by your sector and what type of book you're working with. If you're working on something that is highly designed, meaning that there's a reason that we have all of these different diagrams with charts and arrows and things, a lot of people stick with EPUB because it's just a standard. People know, people love it. We can create it inside of InDesign. That's fine. No reason to stop doing that. If you are working with a specific type of vendor that only supports XML or only supports JSON, there are some brands that go in that direction. My personal favorite is I like to export JSON and HTML simultaneously. That way that covers the range of HTML friendly applications, websites. It can be read by most Amazon readers and Barnes and Noble and Nook. It's just kind of finding that sweet spot of what channels you deliver to and understanding what their need is. So I hope I answered your question. I kind of tiptoed around it. Your mileage may vary.
Thanks.
Mhm.
New Society Publishers, which is a partner that we work with, particularly on the sustainability front, is asking a question that we hear more and more often, which is, how do you have any information on how your carbon footprint from server usage, cloud support compares to, kind of a more common tool like Google Drive, and if not, is it something that you're looking into?
I will say that our servers that we have at WoodWing, we host our own servers inside of AWS, and AWS is fairly green across the board. Our carbon footprint did go down when we started using Amazon, as opposed to when our customers were trying to store things on their own local servers, on their own external hard drives, because it decreases energy usage because it also decreases inefficiency. So I can't give you an exact number of what the carbon footprint was, but I can tell you across the board, we use Amazon and it's been working pretty well for us.
Yeah, I think not to belabor the point, but I do think that this is an evolving area. So
Mhm.
any server-based company is probably going to be asked this question on a more frequent basis going forward.
Sure.
Um, Tim is asking, it's a fairly lengthy question, but the core of it is WoodWing doing anything to help with the front end of publishing as the author writes? He gives an example of having worked on a really lengthy book, 3,400 pages, 560 chapters, 800 plus contributors. So, a real monster. But keeping track of versions, receiving and managing input like Word docs, images as TIFFs, etc was a real challenge. What, are you doing anything to help? I think you just started to describe it a little bit, but help on the creatives, the authoring side or contributor side?
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of different routes that you can go if you are a contributor or if you are working with gathering all of that content. Inside of Studio, there are a lot of different options for taking content and reflowing it into a different file format. So let's say, for example, that I have a Word document because a lot of people are used to writing in Word first. That's where the rough draft exists. First of all, you can store Word files directly inside of Studio. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. If you need that Word document flowed into a different file format, like an InCopy file, into a digital article, into a different file format like HTML, we have a variety of different creative solutions that can help get you to each of those platforms. We have a whole software solution called WoodWing Connect. The goal of WoodWing Connect is to take you from one platform to another. It connects the two. So it's a matter of how do you want to connect that Word document into a different area. Now, to answer the question about creative tools, there's a lot of different options here. It's a pretty close 50-50 split. There are people who write in tools like InCopy, which InCopy has. We have Studio for InCopy. We have a plugin directly into the InCopy platform. So you can use InCopy's great tools like Find and Replace, Thesaurus, Spell Check. All of those tools continue to exist. We just add Studio on top of that, so you get even more options. We also have a browser-based version of Studio that people can write directly into. It has things like glyphs. It has your browser built-in spell check. You can also, on top of that, use your browser-based tools, things like Grammarly, Tansa, other tools of the nature. So it's a matter of what structure, what tools are you looking for, and connecting that strategy. I think that
Are you
answered
doing
that.
anything with respect to permissions for external audiences? So if I have in the book business, it's probably more frequent that you would have contributors than staff. And so, it's particularly in the example Tim provides, is it possible to set an external contributor up with permissions that allow them, for example, read only, edit, limited edit, etc.?
Sort of depends on your setup. Inside of, I'm going to address from both products. From assets, if you have an external contributor that is trying to send you a file, what you can do inside of assets is you create a collection or a folder. You send that folder to your external photographer, illustrator, writer. They can drop that file directly into that folder without having access to everything else. You get an email as soon as it comes in. You now have access to the file. Everything is shared where it needs to be. That does not require a user to have a setup. It doesn't require them to have a username. It does not require them to have a login. So from that aspect, works great. On the Studio side, if you have an external user that you want to have access to the system, that can be set up as long as we do a couple of things. Let's say, for example, that I am with the company of WoodWing, right? And I have someone that I need to work on a design file with me. Maybe they're a freelancer. I go into our system, I set up a username and password for them. That external freelancer will also have access to Studio. They can come into our cloud, they work on the design file. As soon as they're done with the project, I can go in, remove their rights, remove their access, remove their permission. At all times, Studio will give you the ability to set access permissions where it's applicable. We don't want just anyone inside of your files inside of Studio, which is why we set up you have to have a username or a password, because again, we don't want these files out in the wild. So works by design.
So David is asking the question about whether you could either share or point him to a link that explains the metadata. He's particularly interested in photo metadata that's automatically read and imported into the WoodWing dam on ingest. If that's not readily available, you can also send it to us and we'll share it after the fact. But
Yeah,
maybe talk a little
absolutely.
bit about the kinds of metadata that you typically would expect the dam to capture.
Sure. First of all, I will follow up with a link because all of the information that I'm sharing with you is available in WoodWing's Help Center. We have hundreds
Okay.
of articles that talk about how our assets dam and how Studio work. Inside of assets, we capture over 400 different metadata fields. Now, we do grab the XMP metadata fields and you will be able to read the metadata. If you want to create additional metadata fields, you could, but we find that the 400 we have seems to fit most cases. It will cover everything from color profiles, file format size, last person used, person who created it, last edited by, modified by, all of the standards that you would expect. But I won't list all 400 of them because that may take us more time than we have today.
Thanks. But in effect, your default here is to follow the industry standard and capture all that metadata.
Absolutely.
And you're also saying, when you can configure for other fields as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So Tracy's actually asking a question about specific to the dam. What would a typical timeline be for a dam rollout, and are there specific stages from start to finish?
Okay, great question. It depends on your need and it depends on how quickly you need something set up. So let's say that I am a company that only has 3 different users at it. If I am rolling out a dam system to that company, I would expect we could get it set up and rolled out within a couple of months, depending on availability of our partners or companies that we're working with. If you need something more complex and you are also wanting to set up automation, like I also want PDFs generated, I also want Studio connected, I also want this to automatically publish to a web platform, that can increase your time, right? Because that's a number of different complexities that we're adding in. Not to say that we can't do it, it's just going to take more time to make sure that we capture your needs and how everything works. The route that we normally go through is, if someone is interested in working with us, they want to learn more, that's when we start talking to you about just, let's get you on some demos. Let's show you how it works. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Once we agree, oh, hey, this may be a good fit, we'll do a discovery. Let us learn more about your company. Let us learn more about your needs. Once we go through discovery, we write up some recommendations. This is what we think. We'll give you some options. You can pick and choose. Think of it like a menu. I want A, I want C, I want E. Forget about B, F. From there, we agree on, okay, this is what it would cost, this is what it would look like, and we'll set up a timeline based on our team's availability. Right now, we do have a list of, okay, these are the customers that we're working with, these are the projects in the pipeline. We'll get you set into the schedule and make sure that it can serve your needs. So, variety of different factors. I would expect maybe a couple of months turnaround, but again, it can vary based on the projects we have, the complexity, what we're looking at trying to deliver.
One question I wanted to, just as a follow-up, I imagine when you do that kind of initial intake or assessment, you probably find a variety of different situations. So there might be a publisher that's assets are really well organized, the filing systems are clear, et cetera, and others it might be that the IP is spread out across multiple users, multiple machines, not different organizations. is there anything that you would recommend, even maybe not necessarily before somebody picks up the phone and calls you, but that just as practice that you would encourage any publisher to, or any content creator to think about today so that they can make a dam installation work better?
That's a great question. And I think I'm going to default back into one of the things I highlighted in my presentation is knowing your goal, because I've gone in and I've personally conducted a number of these discoveries and implementations. And if your first question is, what can I do better? My follow-up is, what are you trying to do now? What platforms are you pushing to? Are you pushing to Drupal? Are you pushing to WordPress? Do you want to be pushing to those platforms? Do you not want to push to those platforms? How does your business succeed? And once I know how your business succeeds, I can help you with that goal. If the goal is just to create more efficiencies, if the goal is to publish to as many platforms as possible, great. But it's understanding from each different person in the company and having everyone inside of one room. Because if you ask that person to a managing editor, you'll get one answer. If you ask that question to an art director, you'll get an entirely different answer. And it's only once everyone is sitting in the room together, talking to each other, that they understand, oh, this is our overarching goal for our company. So it's forcing people to communicate that maybe have not worked or talked together before in that way.
Thank you for that. I have at least one other question that I want to ask you, but I'm wondering if one of the slides that you have remaining includes your contact information. A couple of people have asked us for that.
If you want to follow up, let me just pop in 1 second. I will put it, I believe it's going to be here.
In the chat.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. And let me know when you're done so that I can ask you a question when you're not distracted.
Stop sharing too. There we go. So if you have any specific questions for me, you can let me know. I also have a lot of really talented people at the WoodWing team that I can defer you to as well if I don't get back to you super quickly.
Great. And that may go back as well as somebody looking for a link for some of the ingest standards, et cetera. The question, this one's a little bit, it came first from Judy, who's she works as a book indexer. And she's kind of interested, there are a number of different ways to produce a really high quality index for electronic material. It's embedded in the text and will create a linked index, but it's not widely used. And I know you have some textbook experience. What's standing in the way there? And is there a role that you see for human created indexes in the future of publishing? Is this and I think probably the final piece is, and what role might WoodWing play in supporting that?
Great question. I love indexes. I'm a big fan of them. If you're using the InDesign Books tool, it does have a built-in index that you can use and create if you're working with an InDesign book file. WoodWing, oh, I don't know if it's,
I'll take care of that.
in a moment. Thank you.
Danny, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it.
Okay. So if you're using the InDesign book tool, it will allow you to search and see all of your different pages, and then you can create an index automatically out of all of those different pages. It's kind of like creating an automatic table of contents, which is beautiful. WoodWing supports the InDesign book format. We do have processes with it. We do support that. What's stopping people from using indexes is that most of the time when I talk to people, they don't store their files in a way that allows indexes. So for example, if I'm the designer 1 and I have this design file on my computer and designer 2 has the file on their computer, I can't build an index to designer 2 because I don't have access to that file. It is not stored in a centralized place. And so most people decide, I'm going to work on my own local server. I'm going to work on my own local computer. I can't cross build. And that's what stops it. So as soon as you start thinking in this centralized content hub and you start thinking, oh, everyone needs access to these files, you can do things like starting to automate the index. You can do things like tagging different areas. You can make those links sing to each other, so to speak. So I think that answers your question, but let me know if I didn't.
No, I think you have. I'm just picking up Dan Puglisi also from WoodWing is just adding a thing in the Q&A, but it's probably better served in the chat. So I've added it there. So Dan or Danny, you take your pick.
Feel
Could
free
be
to email us both. One of us will respond. We'll take care of you.
agreed. That's been my experience as well. Maybe one last or two last questions before we wrap up. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Could you use the term in talking about different implementations of headless versus traditional CMS? What do you mean by headless in that regard?
Okay, so let's say, for example, I am a company that I create a prayer book, and I have different contributors that are constantly submitting different prayers for this prayer book. They have created a CMS that will then, it exists online like a form. So the person writes the title, the person writes the prayer, they write their name, contact information. That's a CMS and a way that people can contribute that information. As far as whether or not it's custom, a custom homegrown built, or if people are creating content directly from places like WordPress, and then you want to pull that WordPress content into a book format and reuse it in something like a recipe book, or if you want to republish it, that's your more traditional, right? Because I'm gathering something that came from a WordPress, from a Drupal, as opposed to I built this in a homegrown CMS.
And you're saying, are you seeing growth in this headless model? Or is it it's just an alternative?
Depends on your sector, and it depends on your product, because it depends on how much of your content and how much of your book is contributor based versus this is my structured textbook. If it's contributor based, absolutely, there is 100% growth in this. A lot of people are writing more and more books and bookazines in this area. As far as your traditional, not as much growth, but that's kind of to be expected with the industry.
And this last question might be a little bit further afield as well, but how big do you think a book publisher needs to be to take advantage of the tools? I mean, if I'm publishing one book a year, it's probably not worth it, but somewhere between 1 and 1,000 is you reach critical mass. I mean, is there a target in your head of how frequent or how many books a publisher needs to have in work?
It's a hard question to answer.
Then you can punt.
Nope. I will answer it. I will. I'm just trying to figure out how to respond this best. I think it only takes one misprint. So let's say, for example, I am a company of 5 or 6 people. We're all working together. We create maybe 2 books a year. In that book, let's say I made a very large mistake. I spell checked something wrong. I thought the file had gone through fact checking. It didn't. And suddenly my entire run of books was misprinted. The cost of having a software system like Studio or the DAM suddenly just paid for itself, because you now have a system that would have caught an error like that. You would have been able to see that that mistake wasn't being made. So the cost is, can you afford to not make a mistake?
Right. So it's really not volume dependent as much as it is outcome dependent.
Correct.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Dani, you've been really helpful today, both in explaining an approach to future-proofing workflows within the publishing environment, as well as answering the questions. I know that you kind of joined this webinar on relatively short notice. We're glad to have had you, and we look forward to having you back in the future.
Thanks so much for having me. I look forward to hearing more.
Take care. Bye-bye.